Up next, completing my Battlestar Galactica diorama. Well, hey guys, and welcome back to another Mediocre Modeler. If you've been following along, you know I've been busy working on this 1/72 scale diorama of the Viper Bay from Battlestar Galactica. This, of course, is from the Reimagined series, and the model is available from Cozmic scale models. I have the lights installed now, and we've got the flooring done and the main structure put together. And so what I have to work on now to complete the project are three things. We've got figures, we've got equipment, and I have some Vipers to build. The figures and equipment are from Cozmic scale models, and let me just talk to you about the Vipers I'll be adding in here. The Mark 7 Vipers I'll be building here are from Mobius models. This is now a discontinued kit. I just happened to be fortunate enough to find this still at my local hobby shop called Discount Hobby Warehouse here in San Diego. And at the time that I had gotten this model kit, at least the Viper Bay, I happened to be at the hobby store and just getting supplies for something else, and I walked back to the sci-fi section, and lo and behold, this was sitting on the shelf. I was so excited that it was there. I ended up snatching it up right away, of course, and I just got it for about a little over 30 bucks, which is what it originally sold for. So it was still sitting there along with the 172 Raider kit. They had one of those available too. The one that was more difficult to find, however, is the Mark II Viper. I did want to add that into our diorama here, and Keith actually was kind enough to send me a Mark III Viper as I was busy looking for one. And this, of course, is from Blood and Chrome. This is a movie they produced after the end of the Reimagined series. I'm pretty sure it was a pilot to launch yet another series, but it never got off the ground. But this is a Mark III, and I was set to add this in, but I happened to be conversing with my friend, the Mediocre Modeler, at that time. He's a big Battlestar Galactica fan, both of the original series and the Reimagined series. And I was telling him about this issue with the Mark II Viper, and it just so happened that he happened to have an extra one on hand from another project that he had worked on, and he was kind enough to send it to me. So thank you very much for that. I really appreciate it. What I decided to do is just to hold off building this one and use this for a different project that I have in mind at a later date. So I'm just going to set this aside for now and include just the Mark II here. So we'll have the two Mark 7s and the Mark II, and I have some ideas on how to include them here in the diorama. But before we get started with any of that, let me begin with the figures. So here's the box that the figures come in, and included on the back side is a painting guide. I recall seeing the orange overalls a lot, but don't remember seeing all of these other colors. As you can see, the colors designate the jobs or responsibilities they're tasked with and what crew designation they belong to. Next to them is a pilot figure in full flight gear, and of course a duty officer. So let's take a closer look here. There are 12 figures in all. This tree contains 2 seated pilots with full flight suit and helmets and 2 duty officers. The next tree here has 4 more pilots, 3 in full flight gear, while the other in the more casual tank top and fatigue pants. All of these figures, of course, are positioned in various poses. We have 8 figures that are maintenance and work crew. As you can see, there are some nice details here to work with. So the figures are already primed with Stino Res's gray. However, I'm going to reprime them with white. I think that will help to enhance the uniform colors, especially the oranges and reds. For the flesh tones, I thought I would try this new paint set that I got. This I got from Andy's Hobbies headquarters. I'll go ahead and post the link to that website below. Alright, let's go ahead and get started. So I didn't want to go into too much detail here with painting these figures because I know it could be a little tedious, but I wanted to at least show you that I began by airbrushing the base colors for the crew figures. I chose to paint 4 of them with the orange jumpsuits, 2 yellow, 1 red, and 1 green. And this, of course, was followed by hand brushing shadows and highlights for each one, as well as the flesh tones. Oh, and by the way, I know that the box did not list yellow as a uniform color, but take a look at this screenshot here. I was just watching one of the episodes and you can see a yellow jumpsuit here. And just for your reference, this is what an orange jumpsuit looks like. And here's how they all turned out. So let's move on with the pilot figures, and I want to go into a little bit more detail with them here. I tested the method I'll be using on this figure, and I really like the way it ended up turning out. Now, before I go through these steps, I wanted to first show you some pictures. First, this is a shot of a figure from the 32nd scale diorama from Cozmic Scale Models. The figures are exactly the same, just larger. And here we have a pilot figure that was painted with a light green for the pilot suit and a tan color for the vest. Here now is a shot from an actual suit used in the show, and you can see that the flight suit is a light metallic green, while the vest is more of a brownish gray color with a leather type texture. So when I started with this figure, I decided to use a bronze color from Vallejo because it has kind of a greenish tone to it, but it wasn't quite looking right. So what I decided to do was to follow that paint scheme that the modeler used on the Cozmic Scale models, but brushed over some bronze to give it that metallic shine. So let me go through the steps here with this figure. And we're going to paint directly over this color that I've applied here. So the first color I'm going to use is this yellow-green from Vallejo, and that's going to be applied over the arms and legs. The next color is now going to be this green ochre for the vest. Now the vest has these shoulder pads, and there's a couple details here on the side that need to be darker. So for that, we're going to be using this ebony flesh for this, mixed with black. And we'll go ahead and use that ebony flesh for the gun belt and the holster. And we'll paint the blaster black. Now the next thing I'm going to do is apply a gloss coat, and I'm just going to brush this on. And the reason for the gloss coat is now I'm going to add a wash. So the wash darkened everything up quite nicely there. The green was a little too bright to begin with, and it also brings out a lot of the detail. Now that this is dried, the last step is to apply or dry brush just a tiny bit of this bronze. And we really don't want a lot of this on there. We just want to try to hit some of the peaks there. We also want to make sure we hit the helmet. So it's now time to apply the flesh tones. I'm going to go ahead and start with this Barbarian flesh here from MSP as the base color. Now this is of course a very small scale, so I'm just going to add a little highlight now to his nose and his chin and maybe the forehead. And for that I'm going to use a little bit of beige red here from AK Interactive. And I mix that in with the Barbarian flesh. And we're just going to dab just a tiny bit on his nose here. And a little on the chin. And a little on the cheeks there. And from his hair I'll use this color from Game Color called TR Earth. And these are all the pilots now completed. Now I'd like to take a minute just to show you a different and interesting painting technique that I learned from a YouTube video. This method is something that actually starts by first painting your figure with black, or in this case I chose a dark blue. And white is then sprayed on directly from the top of the figure, just like you see here. And what results is a pattern that simulates light hitting from above. The next step is to apply a glaze of the base color, which was lightened just a bit here. And you apply various coats until you get the darkness that you want, and as you can see when done, it results in some very nice highlights and shadows. Now this is a painting technique I did try with the deck crew, but it didn't quite work out as well. I wasn't able to get the vibrance that I wanted with those jumpsuits, and perhaps that's because you have to start off with black or a very dark base to begin with, and I just wasn't able to build up the color to the degree I wanted. So before giving up on this idea, I wanted to try it at least with these duty officers because their uniforms are much darker, and I think the technique worked out the way it was supposed to. So very pleased with how these guys turned out. I painted one to be Adama and the other to be Captain Apollo. And here is now Adama standing in one of the hangar bays. So here are the 5 accessory packages I'll be working on. These are various pieces of equipment that I'll be placing around the bay and ships. These include hoists, toolboxes, desks, a forklift, tool carts, barrels, and step ladders. I'm not going to bother showing you step-by-step details on how to paint these, but rather we'll show you what comes with each one, and then a before and after shot. Let's go and start now with kit accessory number 1, which includes an engine hoist, maintenance ladder, tool chest, and a set of decals for that chest. So here's how they look before painting, and here they are completed. As you can see, you need to do more than just painting, you need to weather them, and this was done with dry brushing and Tamiya Weathering Master Kit B. For the red, I ended up using Monument Hobbies Pyro Red, and for the metal parts, Vallejo's Oily Steel. Now on to set number 2, and from left to right here we have a dump trolley, gas trolley, a large cylinder, computer workstation, and workbench. And also included is a small decal sheet. And here they are painted. For the dump trolley, I ended up using a combination of Monument Hobbies Golden Brown and Golden Yellow, and I used a beige red wash to bring out the panel lines. And in case you're wondering what this prop looked like on screen, here's a screenshot of it. The desk and computer station were painted ivory, then I used a Vallejo's black wash to bring out more detail. The canisters were painted with Vallejo silver. Moving on to set number 3 now, which includes a forklift, tool cart, and a tow bar, along with a decal sheet for the forklift and tool cart. And here they are painted in detail. The tool cart was painted with Monument Hobbies Bright Warm Gray. This is now set 4, which includes 8 barrels along with racks and a pallet truck. These did take a little bit of time to get painted and the decals placed, but this is how they turned out. They were painted with Vallejo silver, the racks with a combination of Monument Hobbies Bright Warm Gray and Dark Warm Gray. And finally we come to set number 5, which is just a couple of ladders here. These were painted using Vallejo silver, and then I use a black wash to add some dirt and grime. Alright, we're ready to get started here with the Mark II Viper. Before I go into this, I thought I would show you my 1/32 scale of this ship. This is a Mobius Models kit that came out quite a few years ago, so it's been on my shelf ever since. It's a really nice model. And I'll be setting this aside just as a reference guide here along with some reference pictures. But what I have here now are all the parts still hooked to the trees there, with the exception of the cockpit, which was separate. And the pilot that goes with this, by the way, is configured like this so that the legs and feet are spread out a little bit to fit into these openings. But I would rather use the pilot that came with our accessories kit, and you can see that the legs and feet are together, so I do need to open this up. So I'm going to snip away at this middle section there in order for us to accommodate this pilot. So the instructions suggest putting the pilot into the cockpit and assembling all that before putting it between the two halves of the fuselage. Unlike the Mark VII, this has a right and left half here, so there's going to be a seam down the middle which needs to be addressed. So I'm going to go ahead and paint up the cockpit with a gray color and just dry brush a few things there and put this all together as suggested, and I'll get you caught up here in just a second. Well, the two halves of the fuselage now are together, and it wasn't very hard to address that seam on the top. I didn't bother working on the one here at the bottom because you're not going to see it. It's going to be in a landed position and in a hangar. So I'm going to move on now with the engines and the wings, as the instructions suggest to do. And I'm going to assemble the fighter and then paint the white base color that it has to be. Now with the red markings, by the way, I don't have all of the decals for that. So it looks like I'll be painting those on as well. Well, I decided to go ahead and do a little bit of the salt technique here. And I ground up the table salt to just a finer powder and was able to get some of the details that you see here now. Well, as you can see, I've got things clamped together here while I'm allowing this to dry. I thought this was a bit of a challenge to get the end pieces together here. You've got these two upper halves that kept wanting to pry apart, so I was able to tape them together here while that held. And then you've got this bottom piece that's coming up from this way, and I had to put a clamp to make sure that was secure from the bottom here. And also the wings were a bit tricky to get them to stay straight. But things are together now, so I'm just going to let this dry so it's nice and solid before moving on. Well, I have everything masked off now, and I have to say this was not the easiest thing to do. And I'm going to confine this now to just the top here because it was hard enough to get this done, let alone the bottom, and we're not even going to see that. So we have the lines along the wings, we have the line along the fuselage, and then the nose. Okay, well here we now have the completed Mark II Viper. I want to make note of a couple things here. First of all, there are a couple of decals missing, most notably the serial number that goes along the housing on the upper engine here. That was not available in the decal sheet that came with the model. It was only a partial sheet. Still had a lot of the markings though, and I confined myself to putting the markings just on the top side as I did with the striping because you're not going to see the bottom side at all. Very happy with the way the salt and hairspray technique worked out here. I just ground up the salt to a finer powder to give me some of the finer detail and weathering there. And if you're wondering how I got the cockpit painted here, that trim was hand painted. As you can see here, I'm just using my brush and using Vallejo silver, which flows really nice. And I'm lucky enough to have a steady hand to be able to do this. The trim is basically these raised areas all along the window, and at least they're prominent enough to help me guide my brush there. All right, ready to move on now to the Mark VII. At least with painting and detailing, that should not be as involved as this since there are no stripes to paint on there. So I'm well underway with my Mark VII Viper, and as you can see, I already have the hull painted. What I'm using as my guide is my 1/32 scale Viper from Moe's Models. The instruction for this model suggested using a color called Ford Engine Blue, which was only available in enamel. And since I was using the salt and hairspray technique for this, I had to try and match that color with acrylics. Now, I didn't have any of the colors I used for this ship, since those were all testers paints. So instead, I ended up using JN Gray and Light Blue XF23, both from Tamiya. Probably about a 60-40 mix or so, with JN Gray being more than the other. I think it came out fine, even though it's a little lighter than the 32nd scale, although I will be applying a dark wash, which should help darken the color overall. So I went ahead and applied the salt and hairspray technique to create some stippling and weathering here. And I am now ready to go ahead and assemble this. So I will go ahead and do so and get you caught up here in a second. Well, this Viper was not as involved as putting together the Mark II. You simply start by putting the cockpit into the upper half. You assemble the upper and the lower half, and then you put together the engine housing as shown in the instructions, starting from top to bottom, placing that onto your model and then putting the engines onto the back. That is pretty much it. So next is to install the landing gear, and the one thing that you do have to do if you want the landing gear extended is you have to divide the front landing gear door, which is not very hard to do. You just have to score it with your X-Acto knife and you end up with two doors like this. Alright, so here is the completed Mark VII Viper now, and I'm very pleased with how it all turned out. A combination of using that hairspray and salt technique and also just using a fan brush to lightly brush on some silver here and there just to mimic scratches and some nicks on the hull. All worked out well to provide the detailing I wanted for this scale. And I used Apollo's name and the corresponding serial numbers here for that. Alright, so ready to move on now to the other Viper, which I'm going to be applying some battle damage to, and a tarp. Alright, so here we have the second Mark VII Viper now, and you can see all the battle damage on this side. That was created using my rotary tool, as you can see here, just carving out some areas. And I continued on with my hairspray and salt technique. And once that was done with a wash, this is how it all turned out. So I'm going to enhance this a little bit further with my airbrush, just creating some darker tones here, make it look like it's charred and burnt. But I think that .2 airbrush is going to work well with that. So I'm going to do that. We're going to add a few decals in. I'm not going to do too much here with any more decals because we're going to drape that tarp over the front side. Okay, so for the last Viper, I would like to try draping a canvas over some of it. What I'd like to go over is a technique I learned on the channel called Video Workbench Model Kit Videos. And so I'll post a link to this below, but it involves using Kleenex and some glue and water to make our tarp. So I'm going to go ahead and give it a shot here on this piece of an X-Wing I've got here, and we'll see how this goes. If it goes well, we'll go ahead and apply it to our Viper. So the first thing to do is to mix a 50-50 mix of Elmer's glue and water. Next, I'm going to place the canvas over the model. And we're going to start applying our mixture. And I want to be sure that I get some interesting folds. Try to make it look natural. Once this is done, we got to give this some time to dry, and I'll be right back. Okay, so it's been about 10 minutes, and we're going to apply yet another coating here. But for the second and third coats, we're going to add a little bit more glue. So rather than a 50-50 mix, we're going to like 60 or 70-30. Alright, so it's later in the day now, and I allow these to dry all day long. And so I took some light gray and painted this one, and just some ivory and painted this one, and actually looks pretty convincing. I did a gray wash over this one, and I think this is the way I want to go here. So I think I'm ready to try this out on the Viper. Let's get to it. Okay, so ready to begin now the application of the tarp. And what I've done here is I've applied a dull coat and I fogged up the windows just so it shouldn't look shiny when it's all battle damaged like this. So I've cut out a piece of Kleenex here now, and we're going to go ahead and apply it here. And like the picture, you can see the reference picture here. That's what I'm kind of going for, where it's partially obscured by this tarp here. Okay, so starting with the 50-50 mix of the water and glue. Alright, so I think it's probably best to let it sit like this. I'm going to suspend this on a cup or something so that the tarp can just dry straight down this way. So we're going to give this about 10 minutes to dry, and I'll be back. Alright, so I think it's looking pretty good here. Ready now to apply the second coat. And so I'm going to go a little thicker here with the mixture. Okay, so here's the completed Viper, and after finishing that last coating I was showing you there, I let it sit overnight. This morning when I woke up, it was all dried, and I was ready to go ahead and paint it. So that's what I'm doing here, is using Monument Hobbies Bright Warm Gray. Once that was dried, I applied a gloss coating. The reason I did that is because I knew I wanted to apply a wash. So that's what I did when I got home after work, and you can see the wash did a nice job making it look grimy as the pigment settled into all these little corners and folds. Okay, now that that's done, I have one last thing to do, and that is to enhance this area here that is battle damaged. So I'm going to go ahead and complete that, and I'll show you the finished project in just a second. Okay everyone, well here we have the completed 1/72 scale Viper Bay from Cozmic Scale Models. When completed, the diorama measures 16 inches in length, about 8 inches wide, and about 5 inches high. The guys at Cozmic Scale Models did such an amazing job creating this kit. It's a very faithful representation of what we saw on screen. So let's go ahead and do a quick review of the build now. The assembly of the main structure was pretty straightforward, but there were some seams and gaps that needed to be addressed along the back wall. Rather than covering them with putty, I chose to use strips of styrene instead, and this worked out great. As for painting, the colors are very simple. White for the walls, duck egg blue for the trim and walkway. The colors I chose to use were white gray from Vallejo. The duck egg blue was a mix of Craftsmart's Robin's Egg Blue with a few drops of Vallejo's Sea Gray. I think this part of the trim could also be painted with a light gray or a blue gray, and you'd be fine. The blue isn't as obvious when seen on screen, but I like the way this paint scheme turned out. It certainly adds a little color to the diorama. Once painting and decal placement was done, I moved on to lighting, and the chip size SMDs from Evans Designs were ideal. They provided just the right amount of illumination, and they fit perfectly into the spaces provided. It was also nice that Keith designed the model to have channels for feeding wire through. Having those really made it easy to conceal the wiring. I created this enclosure for the AA's that powered the lights. When turned on, they really make the diorama come alive. And when taking pictures, you can really appreciate how much it looks like the filming set. Once lighting and attachment to the base was completed, it was then time to move on to all of the extras that would go into the diorama. These included 15 figures along with 5 sets of equipment which all needed painting and detailing. This was the most time-consuming part of the project. 1/72 scale figures are small, and it takes a little patience to get through them all, but I do think it's worth the time to paint in all the shadows and highlights, as well as weathering and detailing the equipment. The figures really look great, and Cozmic Scale Models did a fantastic job with replicating the look of the clothing and uniforms worn by the deck crew and officers. And I'm sure you agree, the equipment is pretty amazing as well. So the last element to work on here were the ships, and all of these are from Mobius Models. Mobius produced models of the various ships seen on the show, and they were all really nice replicas. Vipers were made in both the 132 and 172 scales. These kits were easy to construct, and detailing them was a lot of fun. For providing the weathering and the chipping, I chose to stick with the salt and hairspray technique, even though I know there are alternative ways for achieving this. At this size, I usually grind down the table salt to create the finer grains so that the stippling and chips come out to scale. A wash worked well to add grime and enhance panel lines, and a Tamiya weathering kit allowed me to add some finishing touches. Now the one thing I want to point out here is if you are building this kit, there's something you have to be careful of. I made the hanger bays just a little too narrow, although I thought they were correctly placed using the seams along the back wall as a guide. But a few millimeters could have been helpful here, especially for the Mark 7 Viper, which has a wider wingspan. As you can see, it just barely fits into that hanger bay. Now, one other thing I wanted to do was to make one of the Vipers with extreme battle damage, giving it a reason for it to be sitting in that repair bay. When doing my research for this build, I happened to come across a picture of Chief Terrell standing next to a damaged Viper with a tarp over it, and that is what provided some inspiration here. The tarp was easily made using a technique I learned on YouTube, and requires just the use of a piece of Kleenex, white glue, and water, and I'm pleased that the end result looks very convincing. The Viper shown in the scene was a Mark II, but I used the Mark 7 instead since I only had one of the Mark IIs and I wanted to show that in one of the hangars. Lastly, placing figures and other elements always poses an interesting challenge for me. I don't find it easy to create a scene that looks natural, so I use some of the pictures from Cozmic Scale Models as a guide to help me out. And as I look at it all, I think I have a really nice display here with lots of interesting things to look at. I'm very pleased with the outcome, and it truly was a fun project to work on. All right, well, that is going to be a wrap for now. I hope you enjoyed following along. I wanted to mention a couple of things before I wrap up. First of all, I haven't glued everything down to the flooring of this diorama. There are a few changes I think I want to make, but I wanted to mention this because if you look at the final reveal, you'll notice that the front edges of the tarp are still kind of curled up. And I do eventually plan on gluing that down to the floor so it looks a little more natural. But it's looking pretty good as it is, but I do think I want to make a few adjustments here and there. The other thing that came to mind, though, is Wonderfest. As you know, I won't be able to attend this year, but I did have in mind to bring this diorama to Wonderfest. But gosh, you know, as I was putting everything together last night and finishing everything up, I'm just not sure how that's going to happen because it's a good-sized diorama to begin with. And secondly, there's a lot of little things inside that diorama, and I'm just not sure it's going to survive the trip out there, but I'll have to give that some thought. I still have quite some time before 2025 Wonderfest comes around, which I do plan on attending, so we'll see how that goes. And lastly, a couple of big thank yous here. First of all, to Keith from Cozmic Scale Models. It really is a pleasure to work with your products, and it was a lot of fun to work with this one and share with you guys here. So thank you, Keith. And secondly, a thank you to Don Demers. He was a modeler who reached out to me while I was posting some stuff on Facebook about this, and he provided such great reference materials, not only those blueprints, but also a link to Lee Stringer's Flickr page there. Lee Stringer is a guy who worked on the show, and gosh, that's such a great reference source if you want to see anything about the Reimagined series, or you're building something, or just want to look at pictures from the show and the props that they use on the show. Just check that out. I'll post the link down below. And speaking of Cozmic Scale Models, boy, they've really come to be one of my favorite model companies here. They continue to forge ahead and produce real interesting and unique products. Right now, his latest thing is working on ships and figures from the V series. This is the one produced in the 1980s. If you grew up in that era, like I did, you know, V was a huge hit on TV. It really was just something everyone was talking about back then. And that series continues to be of interest to a lot of sci-fi modelers. So right now I know he's got some of the ships there now that he's produced for sale, as well as figures that go along with that. So check it out. Well, if you've been following my channel all this time, you know I'm a big fan of the Reimagined series, but also a huge fan of the original series. Isn't this a great uniform? This is something that I recently got from a guy up in Canada who makes uniforms, and man, he did a great job on this one. This is something I plan to wear actually at the upcoming WonderCon. This is a sister convention to San Diego Comic-Con. As you know, I do a little cosplay, and that convention is going to happen next weekend. This is March of 2024, so it's going to happen Easter weekend coming up here, so definitely looking forward to that. And I did get some tickets again to San Diego Comic-Con this year, so looking forward to wearing it there as well. This is such a fun trip down memory lane whenever I work on these projects. I do really enjoy working on them and enjoy sharing them with you here. As always, it's a pleasure, and if you have any questions about this particular project, feel free to contact me here on my YouTube channel or at interceptedmodeler@gmail.com. So, as usual, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care. So say we all.